Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome you all to a new League of Legends video. So patch 6.16 is right around the corner, and as usual, it's time to take a look at exactly what is coming this patch, what is happening, so that when it finally does hit the live servers, you're good to go, you know exactly what to expect, and you can jump right into it. It's not the biggest patch in the entire world, but the few things that are happening are actually quite big. So if you end up enjoying this video or finding it useful, let me know by hitting that like button, and make sure to let me know down in the comments which of the changes do you think is going to be the most impactful. Alright, so arguably the biggest thing happening this patch is the fact that the new champion Kled is being released. So in case you haven't seen my video talking about his abilities or showing off his gameplay as you see currently on this video right now, let's quickly go over what you can expect to see with this champion. So his primary role is gonna be a top lane bruiser type champion. He has % damage on his W and his ultimate, which for the most part allows him to build fairly tanky, for instance Black Cleaver, into actual pure tank items. That is most likely going to be the core or the standard build on him, so expect to see that. He is also fairly mobile with his E ability and his ultimate, being able to stick on one target very well, being very annoying, while having his W with the % damage and overall the attack damage bonus being quite annoying. His Q ability from my experience is fairly difficult to land. Think of it being very similar to that of a Nidalee spear, but just shorter range. He's got some great initiation potential with his ultimate, offering a lot of extra movement speed to all of his allies around him, and the % damage on it isn't really anything to laugh at. So do I think he's completely overpowered? It's honestly hard to say based on my experiences with him on the PvE only. He doesn't feel completely out of this world broken, but his overall kit seems to mesh quite well, being very annoying in teamfights, simply dashing all around the place, getting a lot of bonus HP thanks to the mount offered by his passive. And for some reason, he does remind me a lot of the reworked Poppy, being annoying in teamfights, having % damage on abilities, and just having a lot of that annoying CC that you just seem you can't really get him off of you. But the one thing to definitely note about this champion is the fact that when he is not mounted and he's just Kled and only Kled, he's not only extremely slow and obviously immobile, but his damage necessarily isn't the highest in the world, but it takes about 7 auto attacks or so to finally get the passive back up and get the mount back on you. All in all, pretty strong champion, definitely has a lot of stick potential, % damage as well, which makes you be able to build pretty tanky and still dish out a decent amount of damage, but also very vulnerable and slow without his mount, and you should really watch out for that. But let's talk about the actual first balance change happening in this patch, and it's going to be happening to Irelia. So it's hard to call this an absolute nerf or an absolute buff, but if I had to choose, it is probably an overall nerf. So currently Irelia is known to be quite a decent top laner, but I honestly don't feel like she's the most overpowered by any means. In fact, someone like Darius or maybe even Renekton is probably better. But regardless, Irelia's passive is getting some touches this patch, and it's going to be as follows. First of all, her passive range has been reduced to 1000 from 1400 in terms of what range the champion has to be within Irelia for that CC reduction to actually take into effect. But following this, the actual way the passive works in terms of granting her the CC reduction has also been significantly changed. It'll now give Irelia the CC reduction bonus based on whether or not she is outnumbered. So for instance, if she is not outnumbered, so maybe it's herself and her jungler ganking the enemy top laner, aka a 2v1 scenario in Irelia's favor, her passive is pretty much non-existent and she gets 0 CC reduction. However, in a 1v1 scenario, her passive is in effect, offering her 10% CC reduction, which is pretty much the same thing as her ult passive. Since her ult passive will give her 10% CC reduction if there's one enemy champion around her, 25% with 2 champions, and 40% with 3 champions. But moving back to the new passive now, if she is heavily outnumbered by obviously more than one champion, so aka maybe there's 2 champions, Irelia and her ally, versus 3 enemy champions in a scenario, then based on her level, she will get either 25, 30, 35, or 40% CC reduction. So if Irelia is laning and she's in a 1v1 scenario, it's pretty much the same thing. If she's getting ganked, it's actually arguably better at higher levels. But by then it doesn't really matter too much, because by level 6 or level 11, the laning phase is probably done. So maybe split push Irelia might become a thing, because now her passive in teamfights is actually weaker, since again it does require Irelia and her allies to be outnumbered for the passive to actually be anything useful. And if the teamfight is a 5v5 scenario, then it's probably not going to be all that useful. But again, if Irelia is maybe heavily diving the backline to where there's 3 people on her trying to stop her and no allies nearby, it's pretty darn useful. Or if she's split pushing and maybe 3 enemy champions try to 3v1 her, again the passive coming into some effect. So overall, definitely some interesting nerfs to Irelia in her teamfight potential, but again, I do feel like this might open up the whole split push Irelia, get Blade of the Rune King, Triforce, pure tank, and I'm really curious to see how this plays out. But let's move on to the next big change happening this patch, and I really feel like this is going to make Nautilus, a champion that I don't really see too often lately, finally become a thing. Now, I will admit that I'm personally not very happy with this change because I don't really like seeing Nautiluses on the enemy team. This guy has an insane amount of CC in his kit, and he's very, very annoying to face. But luckily for all you Nautilus mains, you just got even more CC in your kit. So on top of your passive, your Q, and even your E ability, plus your ultimate now has another effect. So whenever you use your ultimate on a target, you know how there always has that animation of it slowly traveling to that person? Well, that now, whenever it does hit an enemy champion, on top of knocking them up, it'll also stun them. So essentially, the exact same thing that it does to the target you actually use it on, it'll also do it to all people that it hits on the way there. This could actually lead into some very interesting scenarios, because imagine the enemy team is running away or even charging at your team and they're all relatively grouped up. All Nautilus has to do is use his ultimate on someone near the backline. It'll go through the whole team, stun every single person on top of the person you actually targeted, and your team can either run away for free or they can re-engage and make something very big happen. Now, even though this does sound insanely well, it doesn't really fix the issue Nautilus currently has, which is just overall the laning power in the top lane especially. Which is why I'm personally expecting to see Nautilus reappear maybe in the jungle or in the support lane, where the damage isn't as important when it comes to actually dueling, because jungle Nautilus now has even more CC when it comes to ganking, maybe in a 2v2 scenario. Or you have support Nautilus where the damage really isn't even that much of an issue, it's just about how much CC and peel can you bring. And Nautilus already having quite a decent amount of peel and CC in his kit, now only having more, is simply just a better thing for support Nautilus. So definitely curious to see how much more play rate Nautilus is going to be getting in the next patch. I'm definitely expecting that to increase and his win rate to also increase. But again, not necessarily in the top lane, maybe in the jungle, but probably most likely in the support role. But I want you guys to let me know down below, what do you think of these Nautilus changes to his ultimate? Do you think this is a little too much, or maybe this is exactly what he needs? Let me know down below. Moving along, we have Viktor. Now, there are some Viktor nerfs coming in, but they're really not the biggest thing in the entire world, especially since Viktor is considered to be among the best or better mid laners at the moment. But either way, let's take a look at exactly what's happening. So his ultimate is receiving some nerfs, where the speed of it has been changed. So the maximum speed has been lowered to 400 from 450, but to kind of compensate, the minimum speed has been increased to 200 from 170. Now keep in mind, Viktor's ultimate, whenever it moves towards him, instantly always moves at maximum speed, so that's something to keep in mind. Following that, it will now slow down from the maximum speed at only 300 units away from Viktor rather than 350, so clearly it can't go as far away from Viktor without starting to get penalized. And the ultimate also will hit the minimum movement speed once it's only 900 units away from Viktor, but not 950. So again, similar concept to the previous thing I just mentioned. If the ultimate simply goes too far away from Viktor, it'll just move slower and it'll just be slightly less effective. Now, this is obviously a nerf for the most part. I mean, it really isn't the biggest thing in the world, or at least maybe I don't play Viktor enough to understand how much this could really mean, but it doesn't sound like that much. Again, since Viktor is considered to be among the best mid laners at the moment, to the point where you almost have to either ban him or pick him just because of how much he offers for the team, how much damage he has, AoE control, AoE damage, and the wave clear with his E ability, slightly nerfing the way his ultimate moves just doesn't seem like it'll do a whole lot to affect him in a negative way. But I guess we'll see how this plays out and how it affects his win rate once it finally goes on the live servers. Moving along, we have Sona. Now, even after the hotfixes, she's still apparently the #1 support based on win rate, and she also has a very high play rate, so that obviously means something. Clearly, the hotfix wasn't necessarily enough, so she is receiving some extra nerfs happening this patch. Now, the first of which is towards her E ability. The self move speed AP ratio on her E ability has been lowered to 6% per 100 AP from 8%. On top of this, the self move speed overall for the E ability has also been lowered by 3% at every single rank. Now, I know move speed is a very valuable stat, especially with the buff recently happening to the Cloud Dragon, but I mean, I just don't feel like this is the main issue. But luckily for us, there's still another nerf, and that's towards her ultimate, because now her ultimate basic ability cooldown has been lowered to 10% 25%, and 40% from 20, 30 to 40. So at rank 3, it's the same thing. Rank 2, it's 5% lower. Rank 1, 10% lower. This one is a pretty decent nerf. I mean, she is being able to spam her abilities a little too frequently too early into the game, and if she gets 40% CDR with items plus her ultimate being a rank 3, she's going to be getting around 66 or 67 overall cooldown reduction on her basic abilities, which is very, very high. And even though that part is not being touched since it's still 40% at rank 3, I mean, at least the early game power has been lowered because she is known to be one of the most dominant or aggressive support champions in the game. Even though this is a nerf and her win rate should go down from this, I don't feel like it'll go down to anything completely ridiculous. I'm still expecting around a 52%. And the final thing I want to talk about that isn't necessarily directly impacting the game, but I still think is really cool and I want to talk about are the SKT skins coming out. In particular, the Azir one, because it just looks so badass that I just had to talk about it. So these should be coming out either at the beginning of the patch or at least sometime throughout this patch, and I want to get the Azir one for sure. So if you're excited for this as well, let me know down in the comments below which of the skins do you plan on buying. But either way guys, that is about it for this video. I mean, there you have it, the biggest changes coming to patch 6.16. Nautilus definitely going to be seeing some increase in play, jungle maybe support as well, maybe even top lane, probably going to be very strong as well. But either way, make sure to let me know down below which of the changes do you think is going to be the most impactful of the patch. Make sure to like the video if you did enjoy it or find it useful or whatever. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't, check out the other videos as well, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.
What we share.